It's heartbreaking to witness the recent devastation and tragedy that has occurred in Maui. Lives lost, people displaced, properties destroyed, livelihoods interrupted, and traumatized people wondering how they're going to endure the coming days, weeks, months, and years ahead. Much closer to home, a comparable situation is presently unfolding. Wildfires are raging seemingly everywhere in British Columbia, Canada, with Kelowna and Lytton being among the most recent noteworthy examples, the latter having already been devastated in 2021 when the entire town was burnt to the ground. With the situation appearing rather bleak, it's no surprise that many people are experiencing tremendous despair and hopelessness. Indeed, what would you do if your life was upended by catastrophes of this magnitude? Today's topic has been a source of rumination for approximately a decade, but the present events, along with those which have occurred during the last 3 years, are returning it to the forefront. Today's discussion will elaborate on what I mean by this statement. Do not expect anyone to help you, therefore, you must be grateful when help arrives. I will commence this endeavor by briefly highlighting 4 calamities that are ongoing or have occurred within the past few years. Next, I will discuss key insights and principles that can be extracted from these events. Finally, I will conclude with how the realization of my above-mentioned statement will assist your efforts to prepare for, endure, and move on from life's inevitable tragedies. Beginning with 4 recent examples of calamitous events, the first one involves a particular virus that emerged on the scene in 2020. Although its primary impacts have largely been diminished in most of the world, this virus still persists in causing lasting suffering in one form or another. I don't need to explicitly reference it by name, as I'm sure you're well aware of what I'm referring to. Anyhow, as a result of its rapid and widespread transmission, governments around the world reacted by restricting travel and the daily activities of their citizens. These lockdowns were strictly enforced in an evident attempt to hinder the virus's advance through populations. However, as with any action, there are always ripple effects and unintended consequences. Because people couldn't work and businesses were unable to effectively operate due to the immense restrictions, governments were inevitably forced to provide financial assistance on a colossal scale. Canada was no exception, and for the many thousands of small businesses seeking financial support through the tumultuous times, a loan program was rolled out. Named the Canada Emergency Business Account, or CEBA, this program granted eligible small businesses up to $60,000 interest-free and partially forgivable financial support until the end of December 2022. Since the lockdowns and restrictions continued past this date, the repayment deadline was extended until the end of 2023. However, many businesses, chambers of commerce, and other organizations are calling for the deadline to be extended once again by at least another year, to give them more time to fully repay the loan. Switching to the second example, that of Lytton, British Columbia, Canada. It's a small town that essentially burned to the ground in 2021 by a catastrophic wildfire that ignited during an extreme weather event known as a heat dome. The town is yet to be rebuilt, and it's now being threatened once again by 2 nearby wildfires. Its residents can't seem to catch a break as further insult to injury is occurring on 2 fronts: the lack of government action to help rebuild their town and the threat of new wildfires. The third example is that of Lahaina on the Hawaiian island of Maui, United States of America. Catastrophic wildfires also devastated the area, and this case is essentially analogous to Lytton, BC, with only location, loss of life, land destruction, and economic impact being different in some respect. This event has evidently shocked many people, and it's something that was never believed to be possible until it actually occurred. Like a bad dream you can never wake up from. Finally, the fourth example is the ongoing wildfires raging in and around Kelowna, BC. Like the second and third examples, utter devastation and chaos is taking place with nobody knowing what will happen next. Thankfully, lives haven't been lost, but whether that'll remain the case is unknown, at least for now. Before I commence my detailed discussion of these events and the notable insights which can be learned from them, I must say that they're immensely heartbreaking and traumatic for those affected. It's arduous to fathom the magnitude of uncertainty and stress that accompanies having to flee from home, in addition to not knowing whether there will be a home to return to after the dust settles. It really puts everything into perspective and serves as a reality check. When I think about my problems, I realize that they pale in comparison to what these people are going through. So, I understand that I should count my blessings, take nothing for granted, and express gratitude for everything, even when I don't feel like doing so because whatever I'm going through could be far worse. And there are others who are enduring more devastating hardships. If they can endure and still be of good cheer despite their suffering, then why can't I? Why indeed? I suppose that's one insight which can be extracted from disastrous events such as these, but I'll discuss others. For the sake of brevity, I won't rehash the 4 examples individually. Instead, I'll outline fundamental insights and how they're collectively applicable to all 4 examples. Fundamental insight number 1. No matter how prepared you are for life's horrors and tragedies, they can still catch you off guard. In the case of people who live in areas where wildfires pose a considerable threat, they can take preventative measures such as stockpiling resources ahead of time, creating an evacuation plan, and securing a place of refuge before the situation becomes dire. However, even with exceptional preparation, you can't account for everything. In essence, I imply that you can't always influence or control every factor in the manner you desire. With wildfires, we can't control the wind direction or how a fire will behave. It may grow faster than expected, or it may eventually reach your designated place of refuge that's supposed to be completely safe. My point with this insight is to remark that you must avoid becoming complacent or careless due to overconfidence. Murphy's Law fundamentally encapsulates this principle. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and at the worst possible time. Indeed, you might not expect or believe that a seemingly trivial factor will exacerbate the situation, but it's certainly a possibility. In a car or another mechanical vehicle, something as ostensibly inconsequential as one screw can be the difference between proper functioning and a devastating crash. Knowing this, what's the remedy? Answer: not being complacent and always being aware of the possibilities, both good and bad. I'm not saying to obsess over every detail, but rather that you should be prepared for a variety of probabilities and that you must adapt as necessary. Refuse to let ignorance and overconfidence hijack your thought process. Switching to fundamental insight number 2, which is closely intertwined with number 1, it remarks that since we can't control or influence everything in life, we shouldn't bother to waste our efforts trying to control everything, and we shouldn't resist this evident truth. Even when we aren't experiencing great hardship, we frequently worry about factors that we can't control. The anxiety and stress from this endeavor can be extremely debilitating to the point where we are paralyzed by fear. Frustration also tends to arise, because we think to ourselves, if only I had the power to do this, or if only I could influence this factor, then I'd be better off. This line of thinking is largely counterproductive because it shifts your mind away from what you can control and influence. One metaphor the Stoics utilize is that of a river. Life is like a river, and we're merely passengers being carried by its current. We can try to fight the current's ebb and flow, which will more than likely cause amplified suffering and pain, or we can relent and allow the water to carry us wherever it may lead. The underlying principle of this analogy isn't to say that you should absolutely accept pain and suffering without question, but rather, the fundamental realization is that while it's occurring, there's only so much we can do. Sometimes this entails doing nothing, other than enduring the suffering until it passes. Indeed, there are plenty of occasions and seasons in life where this rings true. Life is said to be a test, or a series of trials, and when we experience traumatic events and hardships, they are more than likely just another test. A test of will, patience, fortitude, and certainly character as well. How we respond to these events is often more important than the actual events themselves. Building off these remarks, the concluding section will explain how the above-mentioned insights tie into the phrase, "Do not expect any help, therefore, you must be grateful when help arrives," and how acknowledging this principle will facilitate your endurance through hardship. So, what do I imply by this statement? Fundamentally, it means you shouldn't automatically expect that the government, or anyone else for that matter, will assist you. The harsh truth about life is that nobody owes you anything, and the only guarantee is death and taxes, as the old saying remarks. Additionally, this principle applies to everyone because life doesn't discriminate when it attempts to beat you down and destroy your will. Therefore, you evidently should be grateful when help arrives because it's not an automatic entitlement that'll be guaranteed for you. When people are afflicted with hardships and tragedies, they're often left to fend for themselves either during the initial days after or for the entirety of their plight. When people get laid off or fired, some are able to financially weather the storm by accessing employment insurance or tapping into savings, but others aren't so lucky. Even when there are programs in place to assist those affected by natural disasters or other catastrophic events, there's always a fine print. With these programs, there's so much red tape and bureaucracy that you'll likely never get the assistance, and even if you do, it's often too little and too late. Another present crisis, that of inflationary pressures from excess government spending, is rapidly increasing the costs of essentially everything from food to housing to travel. One crisis after another, it seems, and this serves as yet another reminder that chaos will always be a persistent factor in life. The last few years have proven that nothing is off limits. Nothing is off the table in terms of what can occur, and therefore, we should endeavor to prepare as best as we can by learning from the past, in addition to present circumstances. The larger purpose of this discussion, once again, is to demonstrate that it's naive to expect that you'll automatically receive help from anyone, especially governments. Governments frequently assert that they exist to protect their citizens and that they're here to help. However, as we evidently realize, this is often mere rhetoric because governments create or exacerbate current problems and then swoop in to act like a savior. Unlike a benevolent savior, Jesus Christ being the perfect example, governments are malevolent and false saviors who offer faulty solutions to manufactured problems. Even when society is functioning more or less normally, there are still many individuals who fall through the cracks, and this phenomenon is exacerbated during a crisis. With all that said, the question remains, what can be done about it? Nothing much can be done when a crisis is ongoing, other than enduring and adapting as sufficiently as possible. But steps can be taken to prepare in advance prior to the next calamity. One tangible action you should implement is having some kind of rainy day fund. I realize this is easier said than done, but it must be attempted in the very least. If you can't save financial assets, why not build a stockpile of food and other essentials instead? After all, it's a perpetual concern for many, whether they'll be able to put food on the table for their loved ones. If you've already secured or established an adequate food supply, then you'll be able to endure a crisis more comfortably. Regardless of what you do, it must originate in the principles of preparation and anticipation. In times of crisis, the woefully unprepared tend to panic the most. To mitigate the panic and its detrimental effects on your person, you must be prepared. This presents a different appearance depending on the situation, but avoiding being completely off guard is imperative. This will make the difference between barely surviving a storm, if you don't perish, and skillfully navigating through the uncertainty. Finally, remember that the formula for many hardships is the same, despite their initially distinct appearance. If life's a test of your endurance, then you must find a means to endure somehow. Remember that you shouldn't automatically expect anyone to help. Therefore, be grateful for the help which comes your way, because not everyone is as fortunate to receive that assistance. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing.